An impressive building by an absolutely utopian and genius architect, Santiago Calatrava. This is a station built in 1998. It is utopian because, in this case, it is a very complex membrane that covers two pavilions of the building, creating a light internal courtyard. We observe modern construction from the 2000s, a residential complex that vaguely resembles.
Today we will have an absolutely experimental architectural walk, because by some completely, again, incredible coincidence, we found ourselves in Lisbon with architect Alexander Kriventsov. And today we will take a walk together with Alexander and talk about the modern architecture of the Portuguese capital. Alexander, hello. I'm very glad to see you here.
Hi, Volodya. You walk through Lisbon, thinking you might meet someone, and then, surprise, there's Vladimir Moskalenko with a camera.
Here you are, meeting Alexander Kriventsov, an architect and the head of the creative workshop Circus. Having started its professional activity in 2008, Circus has now become one of the fastest-growing architectural firms, covering a wide range of design directions: architecture, reconstruction and restoration, public and residential interiors, and product design. The geography of the project includes many regions of Russia, even the most remote ones, such as Murmansk or the Kamchatka Peninsula, as well as Europe. The workshop's work is published in professional Russian and international resources. We start our walk in the Parque of Nations. As you know, this is an area that underwent a significant global redevelopment. It was an industrial zone, and this was done for the international exhibition Expo 98. And here we begin right at the Portugal Pavilion.
Yes, this is probably the most central pavilion of the entire complex, which was built in 1998 by architect Álvaro Siza, and it is probably one of the most beautiful buildings, which is one of my favorite references for my work and my design. We can see how very simple forms and shadows create an architecture where nothing is superfluous. This is the most difficult aspect of architecture. In fact, not to manipulate complex geometry and parametric architecture. It is also difficult to do this, but it is much more challenging to do it the way Álvaro Siza did for Expo 98.
It should be noted that this canopy here is very interesting, as it has a reverse convex shape.
Yes, essentially, the designers employ complex specific techniques. In this case, it is a very complicated membrane that spans two pavilions of the building, creating an inner courtyard made of a lightweight, paper-like fabric. In fact, we are currently working on a project in the city of St. Petersburg, and it has been divided into three typological approaches, one of which is the covering of the courtyard, and one of which involves typological techniques, essentially following the approach of Álvaro Siza. But it is so difficult to do that. Unfortunately, even in Russia, it is hard to find constructors who are willing to calculate such a system.
And behind you, there is also quite an interesting building. It is the Lisbon Oceanarium.
It is interesting in that the architect who designed it specializes in oceanariums, aquariums, and everything else, from the lovely city of Massachusetts. Unfortunately, I can't remember the surname, but it sounds remarkably similar to Russian names, or to Smenov.
Peter Chermiv.
Well, yes, absolutely. Vasha is Hungary. Yes, he had a brother, Ivan Chermiv, and they are actually working together on an aquarium. A global greeting from brutalism, which is very different from everything else that was built here for the Expo. Although it was built in 1998, at the same time as the Knowledge Pavilion located nearby, which was constructed a little later.
By the way, the Knowledge Pavilion received an architectural award in 1999.
Oh, really? But it is indeed very interesting. And it is such a purely Maya-style constructivism, with a 100% Bauhaus heritage, like Cambrisque, which is behind us. In general, the Expo is very interesting for architects and simply tourists to visit, because there are no restrictions on architectural styles. They can be absolutely different. What we discussed yesterday, long before we merged in Lisbon, regarding the Bilbao effect and the various architectures coming together in one small space, is approximately the same here. Here we see both brutalism and minimalism, as well as functionalism, all in one place. They are all very different in material, but at the same time, they match well with each other, they get along, and they do not repel. And further, after 1998 to 1999, as I understand it, this district began to expand and be developed with modern architecture. Against this backdrop, we see several vibrant new complexes that are from an entirely different context, which are actually the wings. This is already wing design for the main structure of Alvarussia.
What is coulisse design? Explain.
When there is a central part defined by what the export of 1998 actually is. He needed to create a sort of backdrop, an ala-like space, so that the main part the central square, would stand out against a more modern background rather than low-rise buildings. Yes, this is, in fact, a building that is part of X598. Speaking of curtain wall design, in the background of Alvaro Caesar's pavilion, we observe modern yet utopian development from the 2000s, a residential complex that vaguely resembles the golden domes of Orschkin with the Dutch in the reclaimed areas of St. Petersburg, with a roof featuring something akin to sails. However, despite all this, they do not detract from Alvaro Caesar's object, and they do not support it and are absolutely neutral towards it. Why? Because everything that is built here, even in different architectural styles, has tried to combine in color schemes. This is actually very important for the overall perception of comprehensive design in buildings and neighborhoods. It is important to adhere to a specific color code, because when designing in St. Petersburg, what we see is that we have yellow, green, red, and white, and our architecture falls apart. It is no longer coherent. The color palette of a specific area and quarter is very important for uniting different architectural buildings, which may not only be architecturally unrelated, but also disconnected in terms of stylistic approaches and years of construction. But now, behind us are these two residential complexes, and we see an absolutely stunning panorama, a window and a building constructed in 1998. And we are now. I think the right time is now around 12 o'clock. And, in fact, this building was completed by 12 o'clock because, and then, when the sun turns, around 4 p.m., the shadow changes here. And if we squint while looking at the internal cells of this building, it will seem absolutely two-dimensional. But as soon as the sun rises on either side of this building and the shadows begin to fall, the shadows will form that supervolume formation of simple geometric shapes from which this building is constructed. Next is the material used. To be honest, I can't quite understand. It resembles limestone, perhaps because there are some fossil inclusions, so it looks somewhat like Jurassic stone, but it is not. It is closer to marble. In classic Portuguese glazed tiles, it's all simple. Here, in simplicity, lies the beauty. There are few buildings where you can arrive and feel the presence of an absolutely iconic structure that has propelled all modern architecture, a subsequent, the last. In fact, you have just seen two modern buildings from the 1990s, between which along the road we also see the stunning building of the absolutely utopian and genius architect Santiago Calatrava. This is a station built in 1998, which feels absolutely like it is from another world. He has created his own style, and he works only with this style. No one, except Santiago, can do this. It is utopian because all his works are approximately at the finish line of the X100 first budget with a consolidated approach. Therefore, many buildings are not constructed, but they are all absolutely brilliant. One can love or dislike them in terms of style, but one must not fail to respect them as engineering thoughts, as mathematics. Because architecture is, first and foremost, of course, mathematics. Perfection cannot be taken. And on the left side, there is a modern building, I think, Volodya. It's from 2010. Probably, or later.
Something, yes.
Yes, I can't say that I like it. To me, it seems a bit trashy because the facade is very fragmented, although the solution with the blinds is interesting. It's what you might call pixel architecture. But, in my opinion, what makes it not entirely bad is the inclusion of large facade elements without those shutters. It would have been much worse here if they had all made it more expensive, with more shutters. We approached the concert venue designed by architect Kozhin Krush. It was also built in 1998. Just look at the architecture from the outside. I think you will find certain parallels with later projects by Eric Van Agerat. Actually, the VTB Arena in Moscow on Leninskaya is quite a standard shape for concert venues. Very convenient structure, beautifully situated. If we take the evolution of concert venues or stadiums, it will change in the following way. In the 1990s, there was experimentation with roof shapes and overhangs. Towards the end of 2000 and the beginning of 2001, buildings of a similar form began to be characterized by a downward slope of the roof shape, featuring sharper angles and marking the beginning of parametric architecture. But this is the beginning of parametrics in the 1990s. In the architecture of this stadium, a very calm, beautiful, neutral building. And most importantly, by the way, what we haven't mentioned, I didn't say that all the buildings here are proportionate to each other. Here, each building does not stand out by its volume, which is very important when creating an overall complex of objects, such as an expo. What can you see here? In general, come here and enjoy the great architecture.
Listen, regarding the great architecture, there in the background, we see the exhibition complex where various types of exhibitions are held in Lisbon.
And there are these suspended structures that somewhat resemble those of Rogers, and this so-called tent architecture, that is, some lightweight structures, again with stretched sails. What do you think of that?
For me, this complex is divided into several parts. If you cover it with your palm, each part will look interesting on its own, but together it seems a bit messy, in my opinion. Volodya, look at how the entire complex is made in the same color scheme, and how the blue accent breaks up everything that is there. It stands out in the foreground, and already looks like a small tumor within the overall complex of this export. As we approached the building more closely, we looked from one angle, and here the architecture is somewhat refined, and you begin to understand that deconstructivism has arrived in pieces. However, unfortunately, there is an absolute lack of function because, in my opinion, creating a complex cable-stayed structure with a stretched canopy that carries no meaning at all does not form the facade of the main square, especially since the main square is already located nearby in front of the concert venue. I feel very strange. Here's a piece where it says something related to the meeting center. Here is this wonderful piece, very similar to Kuchasa in places. Well, we are also standing near the building. At the end of the promenade, which actually crowns this main axis, there is a building constructed by the architectural firm SOM, a hotel, and a very functional and expensive viewing platform built in 1998, but it was renovated. Vladimir, you will tell me, in 2019, right?
Well, there has always been a viewpoint restaurant there, and in 2019 it was transformed into a restaurant called 50 Seconds, inviting the Basque super chef Martin Berasategui. And now it is one of the most expensive restaurants in Lisbon. The set menu costs around €350, and it has 2 Michelin stars.
Let's go.
Of course.
But, in general, you can judge for yourself whether it was worth creating a covered area, because from the perspective of electronic completion, it has certainly worsened the original architecture, in my opinion.
Well, this cellular hat was also added later, precisely during the reconstruction, for the famous restaurant.
However, you can observe, from the perspective of urban planning aspects, how the entire complex of buildings is constructed. There is an axis along which several pavilions are strung, with a tall dominant structure at the end. And honestly, I can only speculate. I don't know when this bridge was built.
The bridge was built then.
It actually forms a curved ecosystem that also extends into the ocean, which you can observe.
Yes, and it should definitely be mentioned that this is the longest bridge in Western Europe, measuring about 17 kilometers. Well then, I hope you enjoyed our new experimental format of architectural walks with a professional architect. Of course, the buildings we touched upon during this walk are far from being all the masterpieces of modern architecture that are located here in the Parque of Nations. There are still a large number of various well-known and lesser-known architects who have made their mark here, and I recommend coming here to see, get acquainted, and perhaps learn more. Also pay attention to the street art, because there is quite a lot of it here, and, in general, there are also very well-known Portuguese names. By the way, regarding the projects implemented here in the Parque of Nations, we have an overview of the Martinial Hotel Residential Complex, so be sure to check it out. It's quite remarkable, and if you enjoyed it, please give it a like and write something nice. If you, architects, would certainly like to organize a walk in your favorite city with me, then do write, and we will try to arrange it. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and of course, share this video with your friends. This will help in the development of our channel. Thank you. Goodbye.